we'll get underway. Wonderful. So thanks everybody for making the time for our October Financial Institutional Partner Meeting for Circular Finance in Canada. As I was mentioning, this is officially our last meeting as part of this working group together, but we'll have a chance to reflect on where we've come over the last year and what we've accomplished together, and talk a little bit about opportunities for future collaboration. But I always like to begin with a land acknowledgement, recognizing that I'm joining today from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish peoples, more specifically the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, Esquimalt First Nation here in Victoria, BC, where I'm based, and we're very fortunate to be able to get to call where I live home, where I get to play, live, and work. And we recognize that we have FI partners joining us from right across the country here virtually today, and we take a moment to recognize the lands we get to call home in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. So thank you. Our objectives today, we wanted to bring forward a conversation on blended finance. It came up quite a bit in our conversations, and we'll talk a bit more about it in a moment. More specifically, some of the work that's been done on blended finance recently as a model, as well as having a bit of a discussion around how it could link into supporting circular economy efforts here in Canada. I also shared last week a final version of the Phase 2 Risks and Opportunities Summary Report, so we will have a quick look at that and get any final feedback and discuss the comfort levels with releasing this document publicly and what needs to happen to get there. And then lastly, sort of review some of the proposed content additions to the guidance document 2.0. So that's kind of the overall objectives for today. I wanted to just sort of frame the discussion today. We had some ideas come forward for topics for sort of the last meeting today. One of the ones that was put forward was a greater exploration of the topic around blended finance, what it is and how it could potentially support us. And actually, I found this graph here that was from a survey or a poll, a live poll during our circular finance session at the Canadian Circular Economy Summit in Montreal this past April, when we asked the audience what type of capital they believe is most critical for scaling circular businesses and initiatives. And obviously, it's biased based on who's in the room, but the 31 people who responded to this survey, about 58% said blended finance was something that would be helpful for them in advancing their circular economy efforts or initiatives. Government grants came second, so I'm assuming these are fairly early stage companies or maybe projects in areas like infrastructure. So interesting that that came up, and that's where we'll sort of unpack today's discussion a little bit in a moment with Anik Islam, who's joining us today from the Smart Prosperity Institute at the University of Ottawa. And as I mentioned, then we'll spend a bit of time just looking at the final Phase 2 report and talking about kind of updates to the guidance document 2.0, and want to spend just a bit of time reflecting on where we've come and potential future opportunities for collaboration together as part of a wrap up for today's meeting. So I think we can keep this within an hour, maybe get you out early. But we have it still scheduled for an hour and a half, our usual block of time, in case the discussions go a little bit longer, but I do feel like we won't need the full hour and a half today. So hopefully that works for everybody. Competition statement, just to kick things off. We're in a pre-competitive space and we have to be conscious about any what could be considered competitively sensitive information exchange, things like pricing or collusion or other things along those lines. So we'll be listening out for that and sort of redirecting the conversation if and as needed to respect competition rules. Okay. Any updates from this group? Feel free to share information if you have an upcoming activity or event, or you found some interesting information since we last met a month ago, a new report released, anything like that. Feel free to drop those links in the chat box or raise your hand, and happy to give you the floor for just a minute to share updates with this group. And if no updates from the group here, then happy to jump into our focus discussion. Yeah, feel free to drop, like I said, anything in the chat box there as we go along. But why don't we jump into our discussion on blended finance as a model, as an opportunity to support the circular economy. And as I mentioned, we have Anik Islam, Senior Research Associate at the Smart Prosperity Institute, joining us today. He leads policy research and analysis work on sustainable finance at Smart Prosperity Institute, and has done a lot of work in the area around net zero industrial transitions and clean tech development in Canada and abroad. And really working to look at where that aligns with climate objectives to help also achieve sort of economic prosperity and investment at the same time. He holds an MA in economics from the University of Ottawa and MSc in finance from Queen Mary University of London. So Anik, thank you for joining us. I know you have a few slides here. Really, it ties in with the recent release of your Bridging the Finance Gap report, which talks about the role of blended finance in building a climate resilient economy. And I think there's a lot of linkages here and opportunities to explore how that work could extend into opportunities for circular finance, circular economy, business models, as well as infrastructure opportunities. So I'll bring up your slides and maybe give you a minute to introduce yourself and we'll get underway.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. Too many degrees, I think. So thank you for making that introduction. So hi, everyone. Um, so I'm Anik. I work at SPI, which is based out of the University of Ottawa. As Paul mentioned, we are part of the Institute of the Environment, and we're sort of the research and think tank side of the institute, which holds graduate students doing masters and PhD in environmental sustainability at U Ottawa. So we have within our policy think tank a team who works on sustainable finance. So I'm part of that team. But just a broader introduction to SPI, as I said, an academic think tank and research network. We have collaborations with a number of academics. I think the total is something around 200 plus. And the way we think about and particularly in terms of sustainable finance and slowly thinking about circular finance as well, we do two things. We think about these issues, and I will get to like our sustainable finance research in a bit, in a more in-depth manner. So just not one policy tool, one approach. We think about it collectively as a system, or we try to, and we sort of think about the complexities that are associated with the various approaches we're taking. So obviously blended finance serves as one tool with a broad range of tools that, governments, policymakers, everyone can use. In thinking about that, we try to understand like, okay, what are the implementation gaps? What roles do different stakeholders need to play, etc. The second point is when we think about our funding, the academics, we also think about funding the next generation of, at least in this case, sustainable finance researchers. So I have colleagues who have finished PhDs in environmental sustainability with a focus on green bonds. I have a colleague, Sarah, who's working on a PhD on transition plan and scenario analysis. So really trying to build a pipeline of the next generation of researchers who are working in this space and who will, I don't know, eventually go on to join academia or go to the industry, but really, really helping cement that place, like, thinking, critical thinking around sustainable finance. So we, as a think tank, we have a number of teams work on sustainable agriculture, nature-based solutions. But I want to just highlight the circular materials research and the sustainable finance research, obviously. In terms of circular materials, and my colleagues are mostly engineers in this space, but what we're trying to do essentially, if I want to paraphrase them correctly, is when we think about circular economy, and this is on the modeling side, we think mostly about, energy systems optimization, energy economy modeling. What we sort of haven't recognized is the material impacts in the circular transition. So if you adopt solar power, wind, electric like vehicles and batteries, there will be a lot of material demands. There will be waste and recycling requirements, but we sort of haven't gotten to incorporating the modeling in existing energy economy modeling. And so that's what my colleagues are doing, trying to integrate energy systems modeling, energy economy modeling, and material flow modeling all in one, so that it creates the impetus for thinking through on the material demands, recycling requirements, etc. Through when we're developing decarbonization policies, essentially. So that's a bit on the circular side of things, circular economy side of things within our team. In terms of sustainable finance, we do three things essentially. We think about the climate information architecture, which is a collective set of tools, disclosures, transition plans, data, scenario analysis, and taxonomies. So within these 5 tools, how do we give stakeholders the important information they need to make, decisions, whether it's policy decision, investment decision, etc. The second part, which is related to blended finance, is think about mobilizing private capital. We think about innovative financing tools like sustainability-linked bonds and obviously approaches like blended finance. And the third one being financing beyond climate. So as I said, we have a pretty big nature and agri team. So right now that thinking is partly drawn towards them, thinking about nature-based, nature-related financial disclosures, thinking about like forestry certification standards and how that can play a role in disclosures, etc. So that's an overview of SBI and what we are doing, or obviously just a subset of what we are doing. Next slide, please. So before starting off, a question for you guys. How familiar are you with blended finance? Obviously, Paul showed that survey, which was interesting, 58, 60%, 2/3 of the people recognize the need for blended finance. But within this group, just a warm-up question, like how familiar are we with blended finance? So on a scale of 1, not familiar, 5, familiar with the concept, not employing it, 10, you don't need me at this stage. So yeah, and please feel to pop them up in the chat. So a lot of 5s, haven't seen a 10. That's that's good. So before starting off this blended finance thing, the research we're doing is focused on obviously the financing side of things, but just to caveat that when we're approaching blended finance, we're approaching it in, this is the definition, but when we're approaching it, we are thinking about how it works as a policy tool within the broader, climate policy, nature policy, and obviously circular economy policy framework. And if you look, whether developed countries or even emerging markets, they are using it as a tool within their broad policy package. So if you look at like the developed ones like Australia or UK, they have a separate thing on blended finance where they think about like how does it help implement my policies. The UK's one is called the Green Finance Strategy. Australia's one is called Sustainable Finance Strategy. They do it through their Sustainable Finance Institute, Australian Sustainable Finance Institute, or ASFI. So there is a broad recognition that blended finance can be used as a policy tool, and it's being increased. Like developing countries, sure, it has been used for decades, but increasingly for developed markets, it's being used as a tool. And so our thinking is, how can Canada adopt this approach in terms of the broader policy package? So in terms of definitions, blended finance, we think about it as a structuring approach. So not an instrument, not an investment, decision, not an investment thing. It's a structuring approach where you use risk-tolerant catalytic capital from public and philanthropic sources to attract private capital from private sources seeking market returns. So 2 things I would like to sort of caveat here. First, we can use different instruments and combine them into different structures. So our report sort of goes, as Paul shown previously, like our report goes into certain details as like what those instruments and what those structuring might look like. And there can be many sort of configurations of what might that look like. So loan guarantees, carbon contracts for differences, how that would eventually be converted into a structure. The traditional one would be a grant, a debt, a subordinated debt, or a low-cost loan, and an equity. Like that is like the classic structuring approach. But there can be many other configurations. You can have like a technical facility, assistance facility from outside, which would just support your company doing providing grants on like pre-feasibility studies, stuff like that. So just to caveat that we are thinking about it in a broad manner. Second point being, we are not thinking about, okay, public and philanthropic sources give money so that private sector makes a return. We want like this approach ensures that everybody gets their desired outcome or desired objective. So public sources give money for obviously socioeconomic objectives. They meet their returns. Philanthropy gives for positive impact, say, and they meet their returns. And obviously private sector comes up with their market returns. So that is how we're essentially approaching blended finance. And so what challenges does it address? So two points here. It broadly helps solve market failures associated with various projects and entities. So think about a first of a kind technology risk. You might be very innovative, chemical recycling company, but you don't have a performance track record and nobody wants to give you money. You might have, material demand for recycled materials, but you don't know what the quantity of demand is. Yeah, and so it creates, revenue uncertainty. You, for example, might need you're trying to develop infrastructure around, say, reverse logistics. Sorry, I was thinking of the example, reverse logistics, and you don't have the local collection and sorting facility that you need. And so that creates like a value chain impact, that's a value chain gap, and you're thinking about like, how do you solve that? So blended finance can get into solving those challenges. And at the same time, it solves the investor side of things. So banks, a lot of you are bankers, they have obviously they face duration mismatch. They in terms of, okay, I want to give out loans, but the duration of my loan is not suited to like whatever is needed for the project itself. And obviously there are regulatory treatment pressures. Venture caps and private equity want to take on high risk projects, but maybe not the high capex ones. Institutional investors, you flip the problem. Large capex but low risk. So, and obviously institutional investors have fiduciary responsibilities. So in thinking about this, blended finance tries to grapple with each of these problems. And so if you look at the diagram on the right, you have a risk return diagram. Yeah, you want to be on the line. If you are on point A, you can use sort of blended finance to get to point C or point B on the line, so that it is commercially acceptable. Private investors get their returns, and as I mentioned, public and philanthropy, if they get to it, they also meet their own economic socioeconomic and impact objectives. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, different approaches to blended finance. There's you can stack capital in single projects. You can have a pooled investment vehicle which can fund multiple things, multiple projects, multiple entities. You can have a fund of fund approach where you just give the fund and you channel it into other funds, spread it around. Or you can have like a public financial institution with a defined mandate. And in this case, what I'm talking about, the Canadian examples would be the Canada Infrastructure Bank and the Canada Growth Fund. And so the Canada's clean economy framework sort of relies on these PFIs. And what they try to do is three things. They try to improve the risk-adjusted returns, bridge market gaps, and build stakeholder capacities. And we sort of go through some mini examples of what that looks like in practice. So for the risk-adjusted return side, we talk about building EV charging infrastructure. And obviously my examples are more related to the climate side than circular economy. But in terms of the EV infrastructure, obviously, if you're an EV charging, infrastructure company, you're thinking about, okay, like where do I build? You have this revenue uncertainty because you don't know how many cars are on the road. So the CIB ties that utilization or how much the charging infrastructure would be utilized to their loan, the loan portfolio. And so if you reach a level, your repayments start. If you don't reach that level, your principal and interests are adjusted so that you reach that level and then those repayments start. So bridge market gaps would be similar. And we talk about the example of the Canada Growth Fund there, where, carbon contracts for differences used to fund, CCUS projects. And building stakeholder capacity. We talk again about the CIB. They have this project accelerator fund where they fund pre-feasibility studies, and that is converted to debt, that it's a grant, but it's converted to debt, as the project reaches final investment decision. So these are some examples of how, PFIs are using blended finance in practice. to solve those market failures and those investor gaps. Next slide, please. And so when we are thinking about blended finance, it's not a silver bullet. So there is this perception like if you do blended finance, you've solved it all. I think the approach we take and something that needs to be thought about, and as I mentioned, is we try to think about it in terms of the broader policy package. So you need those climate, energy, circular economy, policy, and regulatory measures to work. If I paraphrase Dr. Rhian Mary Thomas, who's the CEO of the Green Finance Institute in the UK, yeah, policy is the enabler, finance is the facilitator. So, we need those enabling conditions for blended finance to work. It doesn't happen the other way around, that if you put in blended finance, it will magically solve everything. And on the diagram on the right, just gives you an example of what that looks like. You have these different tax incentives, public procurement, revenue support models, etc. And blended finance sort of fits into that state, in there with, as we are going from early stage to full deployment, whether it's for an entity or a project, it sort of helps you go through those cycles. The second point being, we are in a deploy phase. We're thinking about how these instruments work, and we're doing like one-off transactions, etc. We obviously need to get to a mature phase where these the program is scalable, and private sector can readily participate. So turning them into replicable and scalable structures, or the technical term being originate to distribute, where your loans are converted into securities and everybody can buy these securities, is probably the way to think about, okay, how do we go to scale up these investments so that we close these gaps. Next slide, please. And so our hypothesis, and this will sort of go into the next phase of our work, is how different the success will depend on how different financial institutions can build on their knowledge and experience in structuring deals. So obviously, as I said, CIB, CGF, like they're in the deploy phase, how they build their knowledge, learning, and go from learning by doing to gaining experience in structuring these deals. And the second hypothesis being how climate policies and financial ecosystem like incentivizes private capital. As I said, like finance is the facilitator, so you need the policy and the regulatory and the financial system to work together so that blended finance is ultimately successful. So some considerations for circular finance. I realize this might be the last meeting, but some takeaways like I feel might be relevant or is useful when you think about possibly the next tranche of your work, is how do work within the existing climate policy mechanisms and institution mandates. I heard from Paul like there was an approach for the CIB, and the CIB might, for whatever reason, have not taken on a project. And I think the way to think about it is what works within their existing mandates, and what works within like existing policy mechanisms. And that would create the scope to develop new policies that are related to circular economy. And so, it's, it's the saying like, start with what you have, essentially. And so we definitely need to think about like what we have in practice and how we can move forward to create like the necessary policy levers and get them in place so that it works for the projects and attracts private capital. Second point being, again, exploring ways to build in circularity in this climate information, or like the sustainable finance information architecture. I think you guys have already done work on a circular taxonomy, which would sort of feed into that. I know there was something in the report on transition plan. So like how can circularity be fed into those, various instruments? And the third one being, I think you guys have done an excellent job defining the problem. Now it's time to put some numbers on the financing challenges, because I think that would be helpful in generating that impact. Like, okay, like, we need this sort of facility or this sort of mechanism or this sort of loan guarantee into channeling into solving the financial challenges. So thinking about, case studies, problem archetypes, and, thinking about how those can be applied in practice, maybe give some, examples. But what would that look like in a, DCF model, in a discounted cash flow model, and what would the returns look like? So that would be ideally, I think, the next phases as you think about the next phases of your own work, going into circular finance. So next slide, please. And I'll sort of leave it up to discussion. What is holding back progress? I see there are some questions there. But yeah, that's essentially the end of the presentation. I think the next slide has like a link to our newsletter, and like, if you want to reach out, please feel free to do so. Essentially, we are embarking on next phase of our work, which will be looking at like the CIB and the CGF and like how they're operating and drawing in lessons from other PFIs. So Australia Clean Energy Finance Corporation would be one. UK's National Wealth Fund will be one. Like, so how are these guys working versus how are we working, and what can we learn from them, because they sort of have a head start on their turf, and like obviously their policy environment is a bit more mature or robust. So like what lessons can we learn on those fronts? So that's essentially what we're doing in the next phase. But yeah, happy to chat if there is an interest in learning more about the work that we're doing on blended finance.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anik, for the quick overview of what no doubt took many months to put together in terms of your research brief on the topic of blended finance, and certainly gets the minds thinking a little bit about what the different models could look like, and also, where it's relevant in Canada to support efforts and investments and projects or infrastructure and other areas that could also be relevant to circularity. Maybe just Mick had a question in the chat box. Before we go to that, I just had a quick question for the group that might not be familiar with the Clean Growth fund and how that's structured, or what its mandate is specifically, and how it differs from the clean, the CIB.
Right, and I should have mentioned that. So CIB, Canada Infrastructure Bank, focuses on revenue generating projects, revenue generating infrastructure projects. So, a bit large scale. If you think about EV charging infrastructure, would be one of those examples. They obviously, finance ports, airports, they energy storage companies. So, a bit on the infrastructure side of things. CGF is more to do with innovative companies and how they can, scale up in the Canadian market, retain their intellectual property here. And so how can we essentially help them cross like the valley of death, risk. That's again two different institutions focusing on two different things, and that's sort of the idea here. In other countries, maybe one institution tackles them all, but this is the configuration we have. And the idea would be, okay, like how do we help them? As I said, they're in the more of the deploy phase, one transaction, one loan, or one carbon contracts for different transactions. So how do we make those more scalable, replicable, and so that it is easier for the private sector or even like financial institutions to participate. On the final point being, I think CIB has a building retrofits initiative, which like accounts for different financial institutions. So that would be one example of like how FIs can participate with the CIB on different transactions, and like what would that look like for other sorts of sectors, circular economy sectors in particular.
And very vastly different amounts of capital deployment between, I think, the infrastructure bank, obviously, and the Clean Growth Fund, which is at a smaller scale. Helpful, thank you. Any questions for Anik? Feel free to put your hand up or drop them in the chat box. But Anik, maybe you can speak to the question Nick had about EV infrastructure and how it hasn't really been a silver bullet in terms of using blended finance for scaling that infrastructure. Or maybe if you have any questions, Nick can clarify his question.
I think I'm asking more of Anik's educated opinion over the matter and where it's gone. I know CIB had a program too related to that, and yeah, I just would love to hear what you think are the shortcomings from a policy standpoint or from an economic standpoint that you are comfortable to talk to.
Oh, so I think the EV charging infrastructure space is interesting in the sense that you need a lot of different things to get, from, building a EV charging station in one place, and what would that look like to, all over the country, because obviously geography, electricity, all those things matter. And so it's not just the financing side of things that, need to be ironed out. It's also the policy side, the regulatory side. I think, and this is an example my colleague uses, the Ontario Energy Board did not sell electricity, provide electricity to be resold for another purpose. That was an impediment for EV charging infrastructure build out, because essentially an EV charging station is selling electricity. So the Ontario Energy Board was like, no, you can't do that. And so they had to tweak regulations to fix that problem. And you also need a massive planning and engagement, thinking about, okay, what does EV charging look like in a rural space where you're in the highway, you need quick charging, versus if you're at home and you're in, I don't know, downtown Toronto, downtown Ottawa, and you don't need those sort of quicker chargers, level 2 chargers, or you can do it with level 1 essentially. So lots of things to think about. And as I said, financing plays a role in terms of thinking about that utilization risk, or that market risk that EV charging companies face, but it has to go simultaneously with these policy risks and market risks, and the planning and the grid build out that is needed for it. And so all of these things need to happen simultaneously. The final point I would say is you sort of need, again, different stakeholders, different perspectives. I think the example from the UK is helpful. They have this whole advisory group on decarbonizing transport, and they have thought this through, which component needs to do what work, who needs to do the planning, who needs to think about the grid build out, who needs to think about which charging station to put where. And I think that sort of an initiative is needed, along with the financing, along with different financing, blended finance models, to think about, okay, how do I incentivize EV charging infrastructure build out throughout Canada?
Thanks. That's an important point to raise, just about the dynamics of how these projects come together. Smaller projects, but how they get bundled or pooled for an investment purpose. And that actually ties in with some of the conversations I've had in the past with the Canada Infrastructure Bank, where recycling infrastructure, for example, related to plastics and packaging, has never been in their mandate, despite the federal government really wanting the plastics circular economy to be advanced in Canada. And so it's been a bit of a mismatch between some of these public finance institutions that have been set up to support blended finance and some of the policy mandates in Canada. And I think we still see a bit of a gap, unless CIB's recently changed their focus to allow for investments in recycling infrastructure and other areas. It's been a challenge, I think, to find the right ability, especially at scale. And in another example with the Canada Infrastructure Bank, I know they've been interested in supporting things like anaerobic digestion facilities on farms, but on an individual basis, they're just too small to meet the CIB's threshold. So they have to find multiple anaerobic digestion facilities to bundle those together and attract the capital that's needed to address the risk. So it's not always easy, obviously, and maybe I guess my question for you might be what's the most innovative example or two that you've seen, that uses government money or uses philanthropic dollars to structure something that can flow capital to a circular economy related initiative or project? Is there anything that comes to mind where you've seen some innovative ways to, gaps that you see in the Canadian landscape that we could be doing more of here?
Yeah, I don't. So off the top of my head, I don't have the circular economy example, but I guess to your point, on building out recycling infrastructure or building out anaerobic digestion, as you rightfully pointed out, or as I pointed out as well, there is a mandate gap. But maybe there's a way to work around that mandate gap. They have a housing initiative, like where they want to do housing stuff. They want to maybe they obviously have a grid or like an electricity build out. So like, how can we structure projects so that it's an add-on to their already existing mandate? And obviously, this is something that needs to be thought through. They won't do the thing. They're the financial, obviously. Their job is to deploy capital. But I think there are ways and turnarounds where this can work in practice, where it can fit into their broader mandate in terms of building recycling or building anaerobic digestion on the agriculture side. And so I think it's important to identify what they have, but also think about what can happen as an add-on. And obviously, in my mind, if it is revenue generating and if there is a significant impediment and obviously it needs their scale, etc., there should be no reason why they can't engage. It's just that it needs to be thought of more creatively. And this is what my research is essentially about. How have other sort of institutions thought about these sort of problems creatively? So I can give the example of, again, EV infrastructure build out, where the National Wealth Fund in the UK, which is like synonymous to like the CIB here, they not just think about giving low cost loans to these companies, but they also give the funding to local authorities, and that sort of helps them come up with the technical assistance grant or etc. to figure out, okay, these are the areas where I can fit my charging infrastructure, and this is the sort of power I need, etc. So, and that same example could be used from like the CIB's Project Accelerator Fund. You need sort of technical assistance or like pre-feasibility study to set up these anaerobic digesters. So how can these existing pockets or mandates, obviously, or pockets of funds that they have for different purposes, how can they be used more optimally, I would say, to figure out the challenges at hand. Sorry, you're on mute, I think.
Thanks for that. I was going to say, I know another one of your colleagues has been doing a lot of work on the affordable housing and sustainability file, Mike Moffat. There's a question from Catherine, are there examples or ideas where blended finance is being explored or used to advance affordable housing in Canada or elsewhere, maybe?
So it's interesting. CMHC is working on this very same issue, I think. So they put out like a calls for proposal, and we have been invited by Missing Middle Initiative, which Mike Moffat heads out of the Institute of the Environment. So I think there's a lot of momentum behind thinking about affordable housing and how blended finance can support this, recognizing that some affordable housing would need just plain off grants, like they won't have the revenue stream, etc., to figure this problem out. But blended finance can play a role in thinking about certain classes of housing. The other point I would make here is thinking about those link up between local authorities. As I mentioned, the National Wealth Fund in the UK has it. Australia's Clean Energy Finance Corporation also has it, not for affordable housing per se, but thinking about more energy efficient building retrofits, etc. So, how can that be used as a blended finance model to think about, okay, affordable housing? Last point I would make is the Building Ontario Fund is thinking about this issue. I had a conversation with one of them recently, and obviously they're very new, but affordable housing is in one of their mandates. They don't really focus on clean tech or clean innovation or energy transition per se. It's obviously to do with, what are Ontario's priorities, obviously. But they're thinking about affordable housing. They're also thinking about long-term care homes. They have started off funding those things, and like they're working their way to affordable housing. So maybe there is an opportunity for collaboration there, and thinking about, okay, like how can those models be scaled up on a more country level basis.
Thank you. Thanks, Peggy. I was going to just come to you and see if you had any thoughts, but if you have to drop off, we can follow up, maybe email afterwards. Oh, finding the mute button. There we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I need to leave. But no, fascinating, and that resonates so much with our work as well, and with what we see as being so relevant, and to develop and to scale up the circular economy financing. And actually, we are currently working on developing sectoral circular economy financing guidelines for MDBs and private FIs. We are also about to launch a report which is called Unlocking Circular Economy Financing from Vision to Action, in which we identify blended finance as one of the key solutions across different types of private and public actors, as being one of the key priority action areas to work on together. So I'm really sorry that I have to go, but really happy to continue this conversation. And thanks again for
Thanks, Peggy.
this presentation, this very important work. Thank you.
When's your new report coming out on unlocking circular economy?
So I would say probably in a couple of weeks. Okay, so it has been a little bit delayed, but I think this time it should be out in about a couple of weeks. Okay, so I'll let you know.
Thank you. That's great. Nice to see you.
Thanks a lot. And speak soon. Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Peggy's obviously joining from France, so it's a few hours ahead for her. Anik, maybe just as we wrap up, if there's any other questions, feel free to jump in to the group here. But Anik, maybe a question for you would be around, what role do you see FIs or banks, financial institutions playing in kind of helping bring this conversation forward? Is it just governments and philanthropic foundations and that are driving the conversation around blended finance, or should banks and others be trying to drive stuff, even in the absence of maybe policy mandates, for example?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and something I debated with a colleague just this morning. So we sort of launched this, to give you context, we sort of launched this new line of research on maritime decarbonization. And so the International Maritime Organization came up, like they had a net zero framework, and it sort of got shelved for whatever geopolitical reasons. And we were thinking about, like, how do we do this project? Like, how does this continue forward? And the partial answer to this is the private sector, because big cargo companies, big retailers like Amazon and IKEA want to decarbonize, and the shippers are looking at like new technologies which have like net zero ships and net zero fuels, etc. So I think private sector has a role. They have a role in terms of thinking about disclosures, obviously now with transition plans. Just this morning, I think the Business Futures Pathways released their inaugural report on transition planning. So obviously we are, and I know some of you may be on the advisory board. But private sector has a role to play. As I was thinking, like saying in the considerations part of the presentation, maybe thinking about concrete models which make sense with some numbers behind it. Obviously, I have a background in finance, but I don't do this work. It would be interesting for me to do so, like thinking about discounted cash flow modeling and, what are the NPVs and the IRRs. I used to do it before, not now. But thinking about concrete examples and thinking about like what sort of, capital structure, what sort of, weighted average cost of capital, etc. Like, how would those numbers work? Like, I think if there are robust case studies around specific problems, which makes it more, concrete, palatable. Yeah. So I think that would be an area where FIs can definitely help. It doesn't have to be, your proprietary numbers, but you would have like a range of what those numbers look like in practice. And I think that's coming back to a bit some time ago with the Sustainable Finance Action Council, which we helped support back in the day. I think that sort of conversation happened around the net zero capital allocation working group, where they were thinking about different sectors and different financing models. It was pretty ambitious given the timelines they had, but that would be, I think, one of the starting areas where FIs can think about, and obviously thinking about data gaps, what sort of data is needed, etc. Obviously, that sort of falls into the realm of governments and policymakers, but giving concrete examples of what that would look like in practice, which would be decision useful for FIs, would be, I think, these two would be like the data and like different financing archetypes or case studies would be, I think, the way to go in my mind, thinking about how to move this so the circular finance conversation forward.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. Well, we're a bit over time, but the conversation was very interesting and some good questions from the group here. Maybe Anik, if you want to just drop your email address in the chat box and people can reach out to you. And if you're okay with me sharing the slides that you brought up, I can pass those around to this group as well, and people can get in touch and stay in touch with your work here. I know Miranda from your team also was keen to stay connected in with this group as opportunities to engage in the future. So
yeah, thank you again. Thank you for having me. I've dropped my link in the chat, and please feel free to share those slides. It has like all the details on all the work we're doing at SBI. Obviously, sustainable finance is one of them, but as I said, like it's all interrelated, and so like we want to think about it in a more interrelated fashion, and so like happy to have future conversations around this topic.
great. Thanks, Anik. We'll let you go. You're welcome to stay on, but we're going to talk a little bit about our work together over the last few months. And in particular, as you've seen, we've just put together a summary report from some of the risks and opportunities assessment that's been underway with Delphi for the last little while. So I did share the final report that's been designed. Thank you, Kiana, for helping support a light touch on that. If I may, I'll just quickly share the report so people can have a quick look at it, and wanting to bring that up here. One sec. Here we go. So yeah, I'm not sure if the group has had a chance to flip through the PDF document, but yeah, we provided a sort of a refreshed cover and a bit of information on the inside. I did want to double check with the group here if we do decide to make this a public document that people were okay with their logos being included. I think the reference to this is essentially saying CELC and Delphi would like to thank the following Canadian financial institutions and workstream partners for their support and input on this summary report throughout the course of the project. So it goes only as far as that. I will maybe follow up with each of you one-on-one just to get your nod, if that's okay, or if it's a problem for you, let me know and we can figure out a way to reference maybe without including logo. But I think some of the banks maybe are often a little bit more sensitive to having their logos included, but we'll talk with you individually about that. Yeah, we did decide, as I mentioned in my email, to keep both the executive summary, the short version that some of you liked more, and also a few of the longer version was converted into a few key messages here so that you can still get some of the takeaways in a different format than a long-winded executive summary. So a short 2-page executive summary with the recommendations and then the longer key messages. And then, just a bit more graphics and imagery to break the report to life a little bit. We also added, a bit more color and context to some of the case studies, which, you'll see throughout the report here. So otherwise, I think most of you had a chance to review the document and provide feedback over the last few weeks or months, and really appreciated your comments. I think we tried to address most of them, or at least brought forward and let you know where we made those changes at our last meeting. So not significant content changes since we met in September, mostly just the revisions to the upfront executive summary and key takeaway, key messages section, and then the design. So I'll stop sharing here. I think you all have this report in your inboxes that was sent over last week. But if there's any questions or concerns, maybe let us know, or you can send me an email directly, and happy to chat. But any initial high-level comments, feedback on the final document, and people feeling okay about potentially making this shareable? And if so, then we should maybe have a quick chat about, how we put that out. We would probably look to post it on our CELC website and do what we've done in the past with a feature in the newsletter and some social media around its release, and maybe even put out a blog or an article post that we can ask you to help amplify.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll chime in and just yeah, I do like the report, and I like how it's laid out, and the findings in it. Again, the some of the proof will be in the pudding in terms of what we do with it, but no problem sharing it and having our name in there, and however we can help with that, let us know.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jamie. Any other reflections, comments? Nick, I know you're relatively new to this, so I can always follow up with your colleague at BBC.
I'm not going to give you something much beyond what Jamie said. I know Crystal and Carla have been part of the conversation, so I'm sure they'll give the go ahead on using the logo, and there's probably no issues there. But just for the sake of continuity, reaching out to them, I did have a quick glance at it, and I thought it was very valuable. But I'll have to. I'm sure Carla, Crystal, and I will just debrief and figure out how we can apply it, and we're going to have conversations about it too. So. Most importantly, thank you for all the work you did.
Sadaf, you also provided some good comments sort of late in the game as you're relatively new to the working group. I think we managed to reflect on some of those and adjust a few of the suggestions in the content. So thanks for that.
Thank you. I think the report was very well written, my initial comments, and thank you so much for incorporating the new comments as well.
All right. Well, conscious of time, so if no other comments now, feel free to send me a message if you have any other feedback you'd like to share. And like I said, I will send a personalized email to each organization just to get your thumbs up to include your logos, and you're okay to share the document, or if it needs to go through an internal review on your side, just let us know and we can make some room for that. And then the last section here was just talking briefly about any updates we wanted to do to our original circular finance guidance document. And that's the report, the document that we released after the first work stream. There was conversations about making a minor update to that document. And the idea here, based on feedback we received from the group earlier, was taking some of the content from our phase 2 summary report and integrating it where relevant into the guidance document from the last work stream. And so my recommendation or suggestion is, I think that content around linear versus circular risk and those tables in chapter 4 are things that were not really unpacked much in the first version of the guidance document. And I think that content could be interesting. It links to the business model groupings, so it's tied nicely to the content in the guidance document as well. And my suggestion is that we turn that linear risks and circular risk tables and a bit of discussion around those as and include them as a new appendix in the Financing the Circular Economy guidance document as some additional content that links those two reports together as well, so we can reference the new risk and opportunities report within the original guidance document if people are okay with that. But I did want to pause just to ask if are there any other thoughts, any ideas about whether that content would be a good addition, and or is there any other content from the risk and opportunities report that you feel we should also be incorporating into the original guidance document 1.0? Maybe I'll start with you, Isla, because we haven't had a chance to really discuss it too much either, but you were involved in the development of both of those. And I think for some here, they weren't as involved in the first version development of the original guidance document. Those were some of the banks who I think Scotiabank and UNEP-FI and had to drop off already. But
yeah, no, I actually had a similar thought to you. I think the tables would be a great addition. Might be worth it to look at some of the case studies and just see if there's, any more color we can add, add one or two extra ones to the guidance document. But no, I agree with your suggestions. I think that would add a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that. I mean, I really like that part of the research, and just the aha moment for me was just around thinking of linear risks as a risk. And that circularity is actually addressing an existing risk that we don't even think about because it's just what we do, right? You don't even see it because it's right in front of you. But I really like that. So I think it's a great addition.
Thanks, Jamie. Any other thoughts, comments?
We have a resource that we use quite often that I think that would be very complementary to. So
Okay,
just
great.
without sharing too much.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, again, another opportunity if you want to give it further thought, and let me know if any other ideas come to mind as you're thinking about those two documents side by side, the new phase 2 summary report, the risk opportunity summary report, and the original kind of taxonomy guidance framework that was developed about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago. Great. And so, yeah, to keep us on time as much as we can and give you back a bit of time in your calendars, I thought we could just do a quick kind of look back and look forward, a reflection back and a looking forward sort of wrap up discussion. And so just thinking back over the last year, kind of what we've done together as a group, what we've achieved, going back to last fall, we did that joint webinar with UNEP FI, where I think many of the workstream partners were part of that and helping to shape it, but also speaking in the panel discussion. We also hosted the circular finance session discussion. Garrett moderated that at our summit in April in Montreal, so that was great. We brought in various guest speakers over the last year. We heard from Intesa Sanpaolo and Bocconi University out of Italy. We heard from the group out of the Netherlands that developed the Circular Risk Scorecard and heard their perspectives. We brought in a couple sort of SME entrepreneurs in the circular finance or circular economy space, both in food and in construction, and heard a bit about their business models and their struggles and opportunities around financing. And then we just heard from Anik on blended finance. We definitely spend a lot of time in the earlier part of the year unpacking the idea, like you said, Jamie, around linear versus circular risk, and understanding a bit more what are some of the financing needs of circular businesses and circular business models, as well as projects and infrastructure. And that really was presented, through various meetings from Delphi and others as the research evolved and led to sort of the outcome of this phase 2 summary report and sort of the updates that we'll make to the guidance document. So Jamie, I think you kind of answered the question I had, which was, just asking this group, what's one learning, one insight, or one key takeaway for you from our circular finance workstream over the last year? And you mentioned sort of the risk, the linear risk conversation. I don't know, maybe there's other thoughts that came to mind for you. Also, if we could just go around quickly, sharing one thought in terms of, what you've taken away from this work over the last year and kind of looking forward, what do you hope to do with this knowledge, or is there any other area where you'd like to learn more about in this space going forward? So maybe we could just bring that question to this group here and invite you to share any reflections. Jamie, can I pass the baton to you to see if you have anything to add to your last?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, that was definitely one of the key ones for me, no doubt. I think a couple other things that stuck with me at this moment, kind of churning in my head, is I mean, one is the policy question, like that policy enabling environment, and what does that look like? I think that resonates with me. I think Anik mentioned it as well, just around you do need that certainty that policy can bring that creates the ability for financial actors to jump in there. And so what does that look like? So I think there's a whole lot in there. So the policy side, and then the other thing that just and this is similar to the frankly the climate conversation these days as well, is in the sense I get. I mean, unfortunately, I don't think we have any of the banks on anymore. But there was this expectation that banks will be at the front driving, for instance, net zero or climate or circularity. And I think what we're hearing from them is no, like we'll do that when the conditions are right, and we'll support that because that's what we do.
Mm.
So knowing that, like what are which of those barriers are the most important, I guess, to unpack to
Allow
make them
that
feel that the time is
participation.
right?
Right.
Like, because they're not, it'll only go so far if we want them to get beyond their comfort zone and do something that the rest of the institution really doesn't support. And so how do you get them into that place where it's just their business model and it makes sense for them and they want to
Maybe tying that point to the question number 2 there, is there one thing you think would be helpful to unlocking this a bit further? Is there one thing we should focus on individually or as a group, over the next year that could help there, an area where we need to do more work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. There's something in there, right? There's something in
Yeah.
that getting banks to that point where it is they see the opportunity and it's really them just maximizing an opportunity as opposed to dabbling in something, right?
Did you see that discussion today on blended finance as maybe something that would be worth us looking at further in Canada?
I mean, my instinct is to say yes, but I feel like everyone says yes because the thought of government coming in and giving like some money to back something sounds great. It's like, yeah, let's do that. But as we kind of heard, like
To Nick's point, yeah, everybody has to see everybody has to be able to advance their outcomes through that model.
yeah, and there's a lot already on the plate for those. I mean, if you think of the growth fund or if you think of the CIB, like they've got, everyone wants their attention these days, and so
maybe there's a room for some net new opportunities there.
yeah, and maybe it's I do wonder if it's getting the circularity into the conversation around all these. It's not just climate, it's like actually let's make sure circularity is
Sure.
on the agenda for all those different institutions. I think that's maybe the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Maybe we could just take 5 more minutes max and just go around the room to see if anybody else has any other thoughts, any takeaways, or ideas for how you'd like to use this information going forward. I'm gonna maybe point to Pratik from Institute for Sustainable Finance, as I know you've provided some good feedback over the last little while. Is there any takeaways for you?
Yeah, I think one of the main ones I think echoes your comments about policy. There was a lot of interesting insights in the report, but not all of them are actionable. And so just that idea of what actually needs to change to make things actionable from a policy standpoint. So that was a big takeaway for me. In terms of something I want to do, I've been thinking about a few possible things that like we at the ISF could do to help amplify if this report goes public, like related works. And one thing that comes to mind is we have some hand collected data on sustainable bonds, and we could issue a small kind of report about how much of that the use of proceeds go towards circular economy, which is something we do track. And so, yeah, maybe we can connect in the future and find some kind of complementary work to release around the same time.
That would be really interesting. Thanks, Pratik.
Yeah.
Hasina?
Thanks, Paul. For me, what was really interesting to learn throughout speaker sessions, there was a session where one company, I forgot that company, explaining that the main barrier was for them was because the financial institution didn't really understand their operation, like how sustainable their business is. It was very innovative, but until a financial institution came to their site and really tried to understand what their business model was, then that was the main barrier for other financial institutions to follow suit and finance them. So when I see one of the recommendations in here, one of the recommendations in here for a financial institution is to build that expertise. There is some technical expertise in there that maybe a traditional banker may not have, and closing the loop between creating that knowledge between the businesses and also the financial institutions. Like I'm not sure how that will play out in the future, but I also sense that like the financial institution should be willing to take that step to really try to understand what the business models are. And then they can be creative in designing those like flexible financing structures. But if they don't understand the technicalities of a business model, then maybe they
Take
will
some
always
time and
in a
some learning, and
traditional
maybe
way.
yeah, no, it's a good point. Takes a bit of effort and a bit of time, and maybe even some capacity building internally. But maybe as these models start to become more mainstream, or you start to see them more often, you know, it's hard at first, but it starts to become more of a business as usual in the future, hopefully. Yeah, thank you. Sadaf, I know you are relatively new to the group here as well, but any thoughts for you just coming into this in the last month or so?
The only thought I have right now is that I'm learning a lot from this group. And being new to this group, I think there was a lot of good discussion which happened during the last meeting. And then I went through the report as well. And then there were a lot of insights in the report, and I learned there too. And I got to meet a lot of people through this group as well. Just so you know, it's a good networking opportunity as well. So thank you so much.
Do you see the work of Ivy continuing to explore anything relevant in this area and over the next year?
Yes, so we are working on sustainable financing options for the farms. So one of our projects, CAP, which is Community Action Program, is focused on building the community of practice farmers. And one element of that project is to kind of assess the farms economically and then produce insights for building the sustainable financing tools for the tailored to the farms. So some insights would be very relevant to that project too, and we are working on that right now.
Excellent. Well, I hope we can manage as a group to stay connected, and we'll maybe follow up as part of our one-on-ones just to give you updates on where we're going next as an organization and some of the work we're doing on the construction hub, see if there's opportunities to bring you in on any of that. And just a reminder that in our Circulate online community platform, we still have our finance project room for all of you, where you can access the meeting recordings and previous documents that have been shared, and also connect in with other members of this working group if you want to reach out in the future. So feel free to always go back to that Circulate platform if you are looking to find the summaries, etc., to share with colleagues. You know, sometimes it's hard to dig out of your emails to find those from months back, but they're all in one place here, and we'll post today's meeting summary and the report and documents into this platform as well, and let you know when it's all up there. So thank you again. I know we sort of had half the group here. Some had to drop off early. Some were unfortunately unable to join, but it's been a pleasure working with you all, and I really learned a lot myself. And I want to say a special thanks to Isla and the Delphi team, and Garrett, who's not here today, just for your support along the way as well. Thank you. And we'll let you go.
Thanks, Paul. Huge shout out to you and Kiana too. It's been a really great
Thank you.
experience working with everyone.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Paul. Thanks, Isla.
Thank you.